Hi and welcome. Once again, this is Jennifer McGuire and I hope you're having a good week. So today I am exploring a few different creative masking techniques. Usually when a stamper thinks of masking, you think of stamping an image, masking it, and then stamping another image so that they don't overlap and you can create a scene. However, there are many more techniques that you can do with masking. In today's video, I actually don't use any fussy cut masks. You can definitely do that, but instead I'm doing masking with mask stencils and coordinating dies. So I have lots of tips to share with you throughout the video. Okay, let's get started with our first 3 cards that all feature the Altenew Poppy Garden stamp set. This is a new large stamp set with large floral images that have thin lines. These are perfect for coloring techniques. You could do watercolor, Copic coloring, no line coloring, color pencils, whatever you want. But today I thought I'd use them in a different way by doing masking and using ink. So I do have the stamp set and the coordinating dies here. I'll be using both. And I have what Altenew calls mask stencils. Here's the mask stencil that coordinates with this stamp set. And many of Altenew's stamp sets have a mask stencil available. What's neat is it has both the negative space and the positive space for the images. And it fits right up against the outline of the image. So you can see how it covers it perfectly. So you can use this for many fun masking techniques. And I'll be using the mask stencils for some of my examples today. Let's get started by stamping a bunch of backgrounds. I'm using my MISTI stamping tool to save time, and I've placed several images from that Poppy stamp set to cover a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to stamp this with Obsidian black ink from Altenew. This is actually a fast-drying pigment ink, so I decided that today I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss it. So I'm putting my white cardstock into the MISTI, using my anti-static powder tool, stamping with the Altenew Obsidian black ink, which is a nice dark black. After I stamp that, I'm going to add clear embossing powder and heat set it. You don't have to heat emboss this, but I thought it would be a nice touch to have that raised, shiny look. While I have my stamps in my MISTI, I might as well go ahead and create a few more backgrounds the exact same way. I think I created 4, and what's nice about the technique that I'm going to show you is that you can create multiple cards at once very easily. Okay, I'm using Gina K Masking Magic for my masking. I like this because it holds up very nicely when you do a lot of stamping or inking over it, and you can actually reuse them. So I trimmed one of the pieces of Masking Magic down to be slightly bigger than my background, and I'm going to cover my entire background with the masking paper. If you have different masking paper, that's fine. You can definitely use that. I just prefer this one because of its durability. Now I'm going to take the coordinating dies for all of the different images that I used on here, and I'm lining it up. Thankfully, I can see through the masking paper, and I can line up each of the dies. It's very easy to do. Okay, once I have all of my dies in place, I can go ahead and lift this and run it through my die cut machine. I'm using the Gemini Junior die cut machine, but you can use whatever machine you have. Once I've run that through the die cutting, I can go ahead and remove the dies and the masks, and actually that cardstock piece with the embossing below it too. So I'm going to remove all that, and I realized I forgot to die cut one of the flowers, so I'm going to go back and die cut that one now too. And what I have here is this negative space and the positive pieces to use on 2 different cards. Okay, so I'm going to start with the negative space. So I'm removing the cardstock that was on the back of the masking paper, and now I'm putting the sticky masking paper over another of my backgrounds that I heat embossed earlier. It's very easy to line it up, and because of the technique I just did, I have all my die cut openings in the perfect place to lay right over this background, and we will have our masking done around our flowers. Okay, so once that's in place, I'm just going to press it down, and now you can ink this however you want. I decided to use Altenew ink with my Trinity Stamps blending brushes. You could use any blending brush for this, and I'm going bright on this because it's for a friend who really likes bright colors, and I'm using Fuchsia, Snapdragon, and Fresh Lemon inks. So I'm just applying a little bit of color here and there, making sure to overlap the color so I get a nice blending. You can see this is super fast to do, a lot faster than trying to color it with markers. If you wanted to kind of blend this and make the colors of the flowers look realistic, you could do that. I was just going for something bold and different. Now keep in mind, because we use the coordinating dies, there will be a bit of color outside of the stamped lines, but that's the fun part of this technique. If you don't want that, you could definitely use the mask stencils, which I'll show you later. So there, I can remove that negative space masking and check out that cool background. Now you could leave this as is, or you could stamp over it after putting your die cut mask over it. But I thought I would use my mask stencil that coordinates with this stamp set. So I'm taking all the flowers from the mask stencil, laying them upside down in a box. I'm going to spray the back of them with Thermoweb Pixie spray. You just spray a little bit of this on the back, let it dry for a few minutes, and then it has a slight stick that'll allow you to put them on top of your flowers to mask, so they'll stay put. So I want to stamp over this, but just in the background, not over the flowers. So I'm taking those mask stencils, lining them up over my flowers, and then we can stamp on top. Again, I could use the die cut mask pieces that I created earlier, but I'm saving those for my next project. Okay, so now I am using the Altenew Dainty Swiss Dot stamp set, which I use a lot, and I'm stamping this with a yellow Altenew ink over the background, so I could have dots that surround my flowers but don't overlap my flowers. So you could see how easy those mask stencils are to use. Okay, so after I remove that, I can go ahead and finish this card off. I wanted to keep it very simple, so I just added a hello sentiment using this new Altenew handwritten hello die set. There's a bold hello and a thin hello. You can either use these together, stacked, or separately. I die cut the bold hello twice from white cardstock and the thin hello twice from black cardstock and layered those together. I added those onto a white cardstock strip and then also stamped Precious Friend underneath it. And I'll show you the stamp set that's from in a moment. So you can see that inked background. This is pretty quick to make thanks to the masking stencils and the stencils that I created with the coordinating dies. By the way, I used this Altenew Crafty Greetings stamp set to stamp on my envelopes today. I like the sentiments that say happiness enclosed, I made this for you, stamped with love, and craftiness is happiness. So you'll see me use this throughout the video. Okay, my second card uses my leftover pieces from the last card. Remember how we die cut the masking paper over the heat embossed background with the flowers? Well, now I have all those leftover flowers to use. So I'm removing the mask from our die cut flowers, and I'm going to place that mask over the flowers on yet another background. And those heat embossed die cut flowers that I'm stacking up over there on the right, I can save for a third card. I didn't use them in this video, but I'll save them for something else in the future. So I'm putting all of the masks over the flowers on this background. And then we can ink around it. I decided to use Lime, Volcano Lake, and Eastern Sky, again using a blending brush to apply color. This is where I'm thankful I used a very durable mask because I can make sure that the edges don't curl up, and it takes a lot of ink on top without it bleeding through. So I went ahead and applied the 3 colors, making sure to overlap so we have nice blending. Once I was done, I sprayed it with Tsukineko Shimmer Spritz. Now you don't have to do this, but I thought it'd be fun to have a lot of shimmer in the background. And I did partial sprays too, which causes more drops. So we would have like a speckled background too. Once I was done, I could go ahead and remove the masks and check out how perfect that worked. Super fast inking. I can just dry this and then we can turn it into a card. Lots of shimmer in the background too, which I really think helps with a simple card like this. For this sentiment, I'm using the new Altenew Fancy Thanks die. I'm really excited about this one. I like the style. I already had the hello, so I'm thankful that there's now a thanks with the same look. I die cut it 3 times from Hero Art's Pitch Black cardstock, which is my favorite dark black cardstock, and I glued it together for dimension, and then I added glossy accents on top for some shine. I stamped a sentiment on a strip and glued that right below it, and then added some iridescent gems to the background. Here you can see that gorgeous inked background. Notice there is a white halo around our stamped images because I used the coordinating dies, which cut bigger than the flowers themselves. If I wanted the color right up against the edge, I could have used the mask stencil, and I'll show you that in a bit. But I like this look of having that little white halo around it. This would be a perfect technique for a 1-layer card, but I decided to add some embellishments and die cuts to it. Okay, our next card uses the same stamp sets, but a different design. And this time I did all of the masking using the mask stencils so I could show you how they work. Okay, so in my MISTI, I've arranged some of the flowers along with the sentiment. I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool, stamp with the black Obsidian pigment ink, and then I'll add my clear embossing powder and heat set, just like I did before. And again, I went ahead and I stamped a few backgrounds that I can save for later. Okay, so this time I'm using the negative space from the mask stencil. I'm starting with the first flower and lining it up, and it meets right up against the outline edge of my stamped image. I'm putting some tape over the other openings so I don't accidentally ink where I don't want the ink to be. And I'm going to do a rainbow of color, and I've listed the Altenew inks up on the top of the screen for you to check out. I'm using a blending brush just because I find that's a very easy way to get into those small areas and apply a smooth blended amount of color. So after I've done my first flower, I'm going to go ahead and just wipe it off, remove the tape, and then move on to the next flower. And I can reuse those pieces of tape several times. I like to use a dry cloth to wipe off my stencil as I move on so I don't spread the inks around. Okay, so I'm moving on to the leaf here, moving my pieces of tape around so that I don't get ink where I don't want it. And I'm just kind of trying to do a rainbow of color going across the card. So I actually started with yellow, and I'll move my way all the way to the other side doing green. Now this is a very good example of where having a mask stencil like this is very handy, because I'm able to get perfectly colored in flowers because the stencil goes right up to the edge of the image. And it would have been hard to fussy cut the negative space of all of these flowers. So that's one of the cases where having the masking stencil is really beneficial. And it really just saves a lot of time. So I was able to easily and quickly add this ink across the flowers of my card. And there we have our simple design. I also added some shimmer to all of my flowers and leaves by using a Tonic Aqua shimmer pen. I thought that added a nice touch to the simple card. I trimmed this down and added it to a black note card, and I have a white cardstock insert inside to write my message. I had a little ink fingerprint, so I used my detailer tool to remove that. And then I added some black gemstones in the background. You can see here the shine that we have on our flowers. This technique was a huge time saver for me. To be able to color or paint in these flowers would take me a long time. And I really like this kind of bold look that you get by doing this unique blend of color across the card. And by the way, you can see that the envelope is stamped to match perfectly. Okay, let's move on to a completely different card. This one's actually using a Christmas tree. And in this case, I'm going to use the mask stencil again, but the positive one. So this is the Altenew Plentiful Pine stamp set. This has 2 pine trees for stamp layering. There's a larger one and a smaller one, and also some nice sentiments to go with it. And of course, there is a coordinating die set available and a mask stencil. I decided to use the mask stencil in this case because I wanted to ink up right up to the edge of our tree. And cutting my own mask, like fussy cutting it, would be really hard with the details in the edge of this tree. So that fine detailed mask stencil will be helpful. And by the way, this does come with a guide for layering the tree. I'm going to go through that briefly, but it really is easy to line up. So I'm starting with the base layer, the most solid image, and I'm using the green colors that you see there at the top of the screen. I start with the lightest first, and I'm stamping it towards the right-hand side of a piece of white cardstock. Then I'll go ahead and move on to the second layer. If you have trouble lining up your layering stamps, I'll link to 2 different videos here showing 2 different methods that are helpful if you have trouble lining them up. But in this case, I think it's pretty easy because the outline shape is very obvious. So there's 4 layers to this one. So I use 4 shades of green. So once I'm done, I want to ink up a little bit of sky around it and actually stamp over it. But I don't want to fussy cut out a mask. So I'm going to use that mask stencil. And you'll see that it lines up nicely, and I can ink over it and get the ink right up against the outside edge of my stamping. I'm using a Stamp Market blending brush, this is a bigger brush, to apply some blue and purple ink. I'm trying to concentrate most of the color around the tree and then kind of fade out from there. By the way, before I put that mask over the tree, I did spray it with that Pixie spray so that it would stay in place. Okay, so once I'm happy with the ink that I have over this, we're going to stamp on top of it also. Once again, I'm going to use that Swiss dot background, and I'll use my MISTI stamping tool because I don't want to mess up at this point. So I grabbed a lighter blue ink, this is Iceberg, and I'm stamping it right over that, and thankfully that mask protects our tree from the dots also. So now check that out. We have this bright, bold tree against our inked and stamped background. Next, I'm doing a partial cutting technique. I'm using my trimmer to cut a line up to the tree, and then I'll cut the rest of the line over on the other side of the tree, but I'm not cutting through the tree. So I'm just cutting up to the edges of the tree, and then I will just fussy cut that small little part at the bottom of the tree. And what I end up with looks like the tree is kind of hanging off that inked and stamped piece of cardstock. So I'll add this onto the top of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. And then I have a piece of blue cardstock scrap that I cut into a strip, and I'm gluing right along that cut edge. I also die cut the Thanks die cut that I showed you before, 3 times from white cardstock and once from silver glitter cardstock. I glued those together and then added them onto my card. I also decided to stamp a small sentiment underneath it. This is the Altenew Stone Mosaic stamp set. You can stamp those images together to create a stone mosaic look. But I just used the sentiments in this for all of my small sentiments in this video. So the sentiment strip that I showed you earlier and here, that is from that stamp set. I stamped that with blue ink, and then I added a bunch of gems and pearls to my tree. These are from a Lucy's Cards Ocean Breeze mix, where it has different size gems and pearls together. And I glued those onto the tree to catch some light and add some fun to our stamping. This technique would be great again for a 1-layer card, but I decided to add some dimension to it. My last example features some traditional masking along with using masking to add splatter to your card. This is again great for a 1-layer card. I'm using the Altenew Regal Beauty stamp set. This is a beautiful, elegant set, and there is a coordinating die set available and the coordinating mask stencil. I'm going to use the mask stencil for my card, but you could definitely fussy cut your own masks because these images are pretty easy to cut out. Here's the layering guide. I'm not going to go through all of the stamping of the layers in this video because it is simple to line up because there are many points that line up between each of the layers. So it makes it easier. So I'm doing the stamping directly onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. I'm starting with the bottom layer first and stamping that in the lightest ink, and then I add each of the other layers in a slightly darker color. Look how beautiful and realistic this flower looks. You could do just the 3 layers and get this, or you can add the 4th color and get this look. Now I want to use some masking so I can stamp another flower and make it look like it's behind this one. I'm going to use the mask stencil since I have it. If you don't have the mask stencil, you could instead stamp the first layer of that flower that we just stamped onto masking paper and then just fussy cut it and place that over your stamped flower. But instead, I used the Pixie spray on the back of my mask stencil and placed it over the pink flower, and now I can stamp my orange flower behind it. Once I'm done stamping that, I can take the mask stencil for that flower and put it right on top. So I saved a lot of time using that mask stencil so that I didn't have to fussy cut. But trust me, I've fussy cutted fussy cut a lot of masks in my day. I think masking is one of those techniques that really helps to make a scene look more realistic. I decided to add some little leaves coming out in a gray color, and then I went ahead and I stamped the leaves with the same green inks that I've been using throughout this video. Once I was done with those, I went ahead and put the mask on top of those leaves. And then I decided to add some splatter over this, which is a big deal for me because I don't usually have enough trust in myself to do the splatter, but with these mask stencils, I could protect my flowers as I add the splatter on top. I'm using Broken China Distress Oxide spray. I probably should have used less splatter. I went a little crazy. So if I did it again, I'd probably only, use half of what I did. But instead, I used quite a bit, and once I was done, I could carefully remove those mask stencils and clean them. And there we have our flowers perfectly protected with the splatter around it. I then finished this off by adding a few white pearls here and there to the background. So originally I thought this was going to be a one-layer card, but I added those pearls and a heat embossed sentiment strip to the center. So I white heat embossed I Have Been Thinking of You onto a black cardstock strip and added that towards the bottom center of the card. There you can see the splatter around our masking and how those images are all perfectly arranged and stamped right up against each other thanks to those mask stencils that I used. So I hope that looking at these different ways of using masking is helpful to you and that you'll try some of these things. If you're interested in any of these different products I used, they are linked below in my YouTube description, and I really appreciate your support of my channel. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again very soon.